been a lot of talk about two new devices that recently hit the market, the Rabbit R1 and the Humane AI Pin. So what are they? What do they do, and why is everyone in the tech world talking about them? Well, sadly, I don't have them in the studio at the moment to do a proper review, but instead I want to give you my 2 cents on the whole thing and give you the basics of what you need to know in case you're not tapped into the whole AI in a box situation. Alright, so the Rabbit R1 is a tiny $200 smartphone-like device designed by Teenage Engineering, the guys behind some of the coolest and sexiest products out there, and inside it houses a special operating system called Rabbit OS. Now, there's been a lot of news about how Rabbit OS is essentially a glorified Android app and even runs on Android, which rightfully has many people asking, why isn't it just an app on my phone? Well, we'll get into that in a second, but essentially the Rabbit R1 is a bright orange AI assistant. It doesn't have apps or even a usable touchscreen per se. Instead, is driven by voice commands and the tiny swiveling camera that can see what you're showing it along with a little dial to navigate some simple menus. Imagine you took Siri in your iPhone and gave her her own device, and instead of using apps and a screen, you had to ask Siri to do everything for you. Not super enticing, right? However, unlike Siri, the R1 uses what Rabbit calls LAM, which stands for Large Action Model. It essentially tries to take your voice command and replicate it as an action. For example, you ask Rabbit R1 to order you some chicken nuggets from McDonald's. What R1 will do is send that instruction out to the LAM and will attempt to log into your DoorDash account, make the selection of your order, and order it almost as if you did it yourself. That's sort of the most dumbed down, simplest way to explain it. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole, no pun intended, I'll leave a link below where you can dive a little deeper. Speaking of rabbit hole, that's the name of the Rabbit R1's web portal, where you'll be able to enable the web apps that allow you to do things like order chicken nuggets at 3 a.m. because you couldn't be bothered to do it yourself. On the other hand, you have the Humane AI Pin, a similar device in the form of a wearable. Now, I personally like the idea behind the pin a little more, simply because as a device that is mostly serving as an assistant, instead of being a device you hold in your hands, it magnetically clips to your shirt as to stay out of the way and let you spend less time on a screen, which, spoiler alert, is Humane's whole shtick with the pin. Not only that, but the pin uses a small Class 2 laser projector as a screen, which is the most futuristic I've ever seen. And while it apparently works, it has a lot of people feeling like it's more of a gimmick, despite it sort of being the only way to interact with the pin outside of using your voice, which is again the primary method of interaction. With the pin, the idea is that someday you may replace your smartphone entirely with a device like this, removing the temptation to sit on your phone all day and instead focus on the tasks in front of you without losing all your connectivity. It even has a summarize command that will go through all your notifications of the day and give you a quick rundown of what you missed while you are out presumably being productive. The pin, however, starts at $700 and requires a subscription in order to be used, making it a bit of a harder pill to swallow, at least today. It runs on CosmOS, which is a bit more vague in its description, but essentially does a lot of the same things you've come to expect with AI assistants, like make phone calls, identifying things with the camera, giving you contextual updates or answers to complex questions depending on what you ask and how you ask. It also has its own web portal where you can access all the photos and things your pin collects over time. It's a more classy take on the whole AI assistant, in my opinion. Certainly less loud than the Rabbit, but ultimately attempting to solve the same problem. So what's the point? Obviously, these devices are early in their development and of course have the promise of growing to become better and better over time, but let's be real. No one should be buying a product with the promise of future updates to make it better. Hell, even usable. Several articles suggest that both these devices in their current state, and at the time of recording this video, are pretty much just novelty gadgets. And while that might be okay for true early adopters out there, it simply doesn't make sense to buy one of these if you're just an average consumer, because quite frankly, they likely create more problems than they actually solve. They're both super cool in their own right, but they're not practical like they market themselves to be. And in my opinion, voice-controlled tech sucks and hasn't really become mainstream enough for people to really want to be caught in public talking to themselves unironically to decide if they should eat this handful of nuts.
How much protein?
A half a cup of almonds has 15 grams of protein.
Great. I'm gonna eat it.
Enjoy it.
It's really cool.
Not to mention that in the case of the Rabbit, you essentially could get all of the functionality of that device on your existing device, making it hard to want to carry a second device just for asking questions you could easily look up on your phone. It's a hard sell. So the point, I guess, right now is, hey, look at what we can do. Look at what could be. And while that's cool and all, I don't think they're ready yet. I think both these devices could have benefited from a few more months, maybe a year or two in the oven before making a huge public release. And I get it. They need more testers to help their AI models learn and improve. So in the era of early access, here we are. But the thing is, most people don't want to pay to be a beta tester. It reminds me a lot of the game Star Citizen. If you're familiar with that game, you'll know exactly what I mean. It takes a certain kind of user to want to invest early in the development of a product. That being said, the whole early access era at this point is starting to rub people the wrong way. Remember when video games came out and they were just finished? No day one patches, no multi-year long recovery. No Man's Sky. Just straight up finished product. Well, I feel like more and more today, the idea of we'll fix it in a patch has gotten so loosely interpreted that now practically everything we buy is in some sort of unfinished state. And the level of functionality widely varies depending on what it is. In the case of these AI devices, I'd say the promise is still a ways off, and what we have today is much closer to being a prototype you'd see at CES rather than a product you'd run out and spend your money on. I think this is in part due to the fact that these are software products in a hardware package. And I think right now, most people are okay with early access software due to its usually low price of entry. But when you're spending literally hundreds of dollars on a piece of hardware that has finished packaging and documents, that pill gets a little harder to swallow. At least for me. I've definitely been disappointed with my fair share of beta software and games, but there's something extra disappointing about buying a physical product only to have it show up and not work the way you were told it would. It's a sting that burns a little extra when that device now sits on your desk staring at you in its sexy, over-engineered designer case, yet you know that if you pick it up to use it, it's just gonna disappoint you and probably piss you off. In any case, the hardware of both these devices feel a bit ahead of the software, which again, is what's supposed to make these devices different. It reminds me of how the Nothing phone is praised mostly for its hardware design, but ultimately is just another Android smartphone. Thus, the whole selling point is the design. And I think that's kind of where the Rabbit R1 and the AI Pin currently sit. Their design is arguably some of the most unique we've seen in a device, but without the software to back them up, they're just not really worth buying. Yet. Which further proves my point that software kills hardware experiences. And while that topic is much more gray than I'd care to dive into, I want to wrap this up with that I think no matter what, there will always be a crowd of early adopters who are willing to be a part of a developing product from napkin sketch to final release. Heck, I've spent way more in Star Citizen than I care to admit, but that's because I strongly believe in its development. At the same time, I actively tell my friends not to buy into the game at all, and instead try it for free when the game comes around. And I think that's what's going on with these AI devices. Early adopters want to be excited about the idea of something truly new that isn't just another smartphone spec bump. However, no one in their right mind could recommend these devices to anyone who isn't willing to deal with the bumpy road that is effectively a beta product, at least for now. I honestly don't even know what's considered final these days. I feel like we live in a physical manifestation of the final, real final.jpg kind of world, and for some people, they're sick of it. But that's gonna be it for this one. If you have the Rabbit R1 or the AI Pin, drop us a comment down below and let us know what your experience has been so far. Hopefully, I'll get my hands on them soon, but until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Hey Siri. Order me chicken nuggets from DoorDash.
I don't see an app called DoorDash. You could try searching the App Store.
Bullshit.